Hey, welcome to the Healthy Postnatal Body Podcast with your postnatal expert Peter Lapp. That, as always, would be me. Today, I am joined by Red, Lola, Kitty and Buddy as we're talking about the satiety theory, how to find time to exercise, and what I call middle class inclusivity. It'll be great fun. I'm basically just answering your questions again, right? That's always fun. That's what I like to do. Anyways, here we go. Hey, welcome to the Healthy Postnatal Body Podcast with me. This is the podcast for, what are we, the 13th of February 2020. 2020. It's been another beautiful rainy day. Like I said, I'm joined by my 4 favorite fluffies, the 4 that I pay the mortgage for, so to speak. And Lola's been sneezing a little bit in the background, so if you hear a little sneeze every now and again, that's what that'll be. I hope you're well. I hope you're doing grand. I'm basically back to answering emails this week. Isn't that nice? So what I'm talking about today, the satiety theory. Let's start there. Let's just get straight into it. Right, the show of 3 halves, if you will. The satiety theory, developed by Professor Susanna Holt. I was asked about this because remember that podcast episode I did a couple of weeks ago about Dr. Michael Mosley and the other 2, where I discussed the protein leverage hypothesis and all that sort of stuff that Dr. Mosley claimed was new research, basically, in an effort to sell his book. And I mentioned before the protein leverage theory was basically extrapolated from and built on the satiety theory a little bit. And someone sent me an email saying, yeah, you never really went into that bit. So what is it? What is it? So there you go. Let's talk about it. So the satiety theory, basically what it showed that what it basically is about the satiating effect of food. Basically how full and content you are after eating the food. Now what the experiment that Professor Holt did was basically they gave everybody like 1,000 kilojoule portion of food. So everybody got a similar portion of food with regards to the calories that were in the food. And then they asked them how full they were immediately afterwards, after eating it, and how long they were full for and all that sort of stuff. The portions were meant to keep people full for about 2 hours. And it's an interesting experiment. I'm not saying that it's the be-all and end-all, but I think it's definitely a very interesting one because being aware of how certain foods fill you up and the effect certain foods have on you with regards to a fuller for longer, for want of a better phrase, sort of effect, I think is very, very useful, especially when you're just looking at weight management or anything like that a little bit, or just, healthy eating or anything like that. It's useful to know just what certain foods do to you. I'm not saying that you can't eat any certain foods. I'm just saying that certain foods will keep you fuller for longer. Right? So basically they gave everybody portions of food. And the findings are quite interesting. And if you think about it, not that surprising, unless you're a low-carb fanatic. Basically, like I said at the time, like I said a couple of weeks ago, they found that high fiber and high lean protein foods keep you fuller for longer. They're much more satiating. So they found that high carb, low fat foods, basically that was like the ideal combination. You're talking potatoes, pastas, oranges, fish, all that sort of stuff. They found that the problem with fruit, and this is an interesting one, when people always say, if you're hungry, just eat an apple. They gave people portions of food, and if you, of course, like I mentioned, if you give people a calorific portion of food, as in the portion was a certain calorie size. I believe it was 240 calories, 1,000 kilojoules. But I'm not 100% sure on that, and I'm too lazy to check it right now. So, because fruit is so low in calories, you can have a lot of fruit if you're comparing it to, say, a portion of ice cream or a portion of steak or whatever. So what I found with fruit is that, I mean, in my case, it's always watermelon, right? If I fancy something quick, I'll have a bit of watermelon, and that lasts me a little while. They found that the satiating effect of fruit was very high in what they call short-term satiety. Basically keeps you full for a while, but within, say, at the end of that 2-hour period, it, because of the water content of food, of fruit, you go to the toilet and you pee it all out, and basically then you're not, you're back to feeling, I don't know, peckish or hungry, whatever you want to call it. As the intuitive eating crowd would say, your hunger cues are activated again, right? So you can have a lot of fruit and it fills you up for a while, but after 2 hours, that drops off massively and all that sort of stuff. If you're looking at fats, and this is an interesting bit, basically looking at the leaner the food is, the harder it is to overeat on it. You know, if you think of it this way, you can eat more chicken thighs than you can eat chicken breast, right? 1 chicken breast, 2 at a push, I can manage. 2 would already be too much for me. But chicken legs, chicken thighs and all that sort of stuff, you can easily have 4 or 5 of. And calorie-wise, they're obviously much higher. It's because of the fat content of it. High fat, high carb sort of food was very, very, they're much harder to resist, as I waffle through that sentence, apologies. They're much harder to resist, you know, high carb, high fat, think cakes and all that sort of, cakes, donuts, that sort of thing. Much harder to resist, much harder to say no to, so the drive to eat them is much stronger than, say, the drive to eat boiled potatoes is. But they never really hit the spot at all. It's really difficult to feel full eating that stuff unless you eat such a tremendous quantity of food, quantity of cake, that you basically have consumed a tremendous amount of calories, but you're basically sick already by the time you actually feel satiated, satisfied, if you will. And this is kind of what the problem with cakes and donuts and all that sort of thing is, that they're highly calorie dense because of the high fat and high sugar, but they never really, because there's no nutritional content to it, very little at least, that your body's never happy. So your body craves it, your brain craves it, so to speak, but the effect on your physical body, so to speak, your organs and your stomach and all that sort of thing, the things that you want to feel nice, is virtually, it's never good. And this is an important bit to realize, that I'm not telling you to eat boiled potatoes, which, by the way, were found to be the most, the highest scoring on the satiety scale. Although nobody really knows whether that's just because they're remarkably boring to eat, or whether they actually fill you up that much. But it's important to realize that what your brain calls out for sometimes is not necessarily going to be the thing that hits the spot with regards to filling you up, getting you satisfied, and making you feel better in the long run. And I can have a piece of cake now, and then half an hour later, I can eat more, because it doesn't really do anything for me. Whereas if I have watermelon, in my case, you know, a quarter watermelon, something like that, is 2 hours. If I have a meal, I'm fuller for much longer, right? If I have chicken breast and carrots and all that sort of stuff, I'm basically done for the evening, right? realizing those things are actually quite useful, because it makes you realize that the bit that is asking for the cake, the bit that is tempted by the cake, is a different beast altogether. The inner pig that Dr. What's his face spoke about on the podcast about a month ago. If you think that I am peckish, a biscuit isn't really going to do the job of keeping you full for any length of time. Right? Biscuits are nice. I'm not telling you not to have a biscuit, but they're not going to keep you full. You need something either high in fiber or a lean protein to really do that job for you. Basically, it basically comes down to, keep it nice, whole foods, and nice and natural. The leaner, lower in fat the product is, the harder it is to overeat. Everyone can overeat chips or fries, as you Americans call it. Overeating boiled potatoes is just much more difficult. Now, it's not the same thing as eating low fat and buying low fat products. Because low-fat foods often have added sugar, which undoes kind of all the good work and all that sort of stuff, which is why they were designed that way, right? Food manufacturers obviously understand all this stuff, and they want you to eat more, basically, because they need you to buy more. If you eat more of everything, make more money, right? It's basically that simple. They just make a bit more money, and therefore they've maximized everything to trick you into eating as much and buying as much as they can. We spoke about the packaging before. Mentioned before the interview we did a long time ago about food addiction, about the machine that Doritos have to make sure that the crunch of a Dorito hits that sweet spot in your brain. We spoke about packaging. We spoke about all that sort of stuff. Basically everything that a food manufacturer does is designed to get you to eat more. So low fat usually means high in something else that you don't necessarily want to eat, that you don't necessarily feel full with. If you, of course, you are inclined to eat low fat foods. I tend to just have a normal portion of the good stuff, so to speak. That's basically what the satiety theory is. Basically, if you eat something high in fiber, basically, I'll break it down very, very simply. Fruit lasts for 2 hours-ish. So at 3 o'clock, if you're peckish at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you have a bunch of fruit, then by 5 o'clock you likely think to yourself, I need some more food, right? If you eat a lean protein, then you will not eat as much of that as you would do with a fatty protein. So chicken breast you eat less of calorie-wise, right? That's all I'm talking about here. Than, say, chicken wings or chicken thighs or anything like that. The same goes for high-fiber carbohydrates that are low in fat. So, your potatoes and certain pastas and all that sort of stuff, all the whole meal stuff. Really works nice for this. Potatoes scored, like I said, boiled potatoes scored very highly on the chart. And in an ideal world, you take a nice starchy carb and you mix that with a nice lean protein. Okay. Or you have a nice fibrous thing, or you have an orange or something like that, which is a nice fibery sort of piece of fruit that scores fairly highly. And you have that with, I don't know, a piece of cheese or something like that. Which is admittedly a bit high in fat, maybe in salt, but it's also in protein, and therefore it keeps you fuller for longer. That is kind of what the satiety theory said. There is a scale. I will link to that. There are quite a few products on it. You can have a look and you'll be surprised with one or two of them. I'm sure. You won't be surprised to find that cake doesn't score that highly on those things. Right, what else am I talking about today? Let me just bring this up a little bit. What else was I asked? Oh yeah, time management. I know I put something up the other day, and I had an email about this before. With people, with women that got in touch saying, I just don't have time to get a full session in. And I spoke before about how long you need to exercise and all that, so I'm not really going to go into it that much. I know that the Healthy Postnatal Body home program is, of course, the home routine takes about 10 minutes, so that's not too long. And I would argue that most people will be able to find 10 minutes in their day of to exercise. But if you're struggling with that, then you could always break it down more. Right? There is no reason why you can't do 2 times 5 minutes. The key to finding time to exercise, the key to achieving your goals when you have limited time is to be really targeted in doing your exercises. So what I've really tried to do with the HPNB home routines is make sure all the muscles get hit that we want to hit for, say, diastasis recti or posture improvement or legs or whatever, depending on which stage of the program you're at. You get to choose, right? So say you want to work on your legs and your glutes. There's no point doing bicep curls, right? You're just wasting your time a little bit then. And that is kind of what I've been really careful with the HPNB program, is to make sure that the home routines are focused, and that is 10 minutes of focus, which you could split up into 2 sets of 5, no problem, or 5 sets of 2 if you wanted to. There's no reason why you couldn't, why you wouldn't do that. And then the strength sessions, most of them are between 28 and 45 minutes, depending on your fitness level and your health level and all that sort of stuff, as in what your body is willing and able to let you do. And you can just squeeze that in if you're targeted. If you're targeting your exercises. I think most people, when they do an hour's worth of training, they're wasting at least 20, 25 minutes of that time. Talking, looking at the phone, resting or whatever. Or doing the wrong exercises. Doing filler exercises, I call them. I do them with my clients a lot, of course. To give certain parts of the body a bit of a rest, but still keep things moving. Yeah, you can do things like bicep curls and shoulder presses and all that sort of stuff. But if your goal is to heal your diastasis recti and just your diastasis recti, then there's no point doing bicep curls. Right? Then you just focus on your core stuff. And yeah, like I said, I would argue almost everybody has 10 minutes a day. And I'm not talking like in a Joe Wicks sort of jump around for 10 minutes, but 10 minutes of targeted, knowing what muscles you need to work, not having the time to figure out anything for yourself. So you follow a program. It's always key, right? It's always, I keep coming back to that. And you just stick at that line. You keep driving that road, right? If I want to get from Edinburgh to Glasgow, I'm not going on a detour. I'm just going to go straight there, straight in and out, so to speak. And that is all it's about. So when you're, I'm not talking, I know a lot of people would say, I just get up 10 minutes earlier to do your exercise or switch the television off or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about. Those tips very rarely work, because there's a reason you're not getting up 10 minutes earlier, because you're tired. I don't get up 10 minutes earlier to train. You're out of your mind. All I want to do is sleep in the morning and in the afternoon and in the evening, to be honest. But I can be clever with the way I exercise. So following a program, following the A to B, and then just breaking it all down. If you have a 10-minute routine, but you don't have 10 minutes, you do 2 times 5. Right? It's that simple. But you have to find time for yourself to do it. You have to make time for yourself to do it, because not exercising is one of those things that's going to bite you in the bum later on. Anyways, finally, the last of the subjects for today. I would like to talk about inclusivity a little bit. And I know what you're thinking. Pete, you're a middle-aged white guy. Shut up. And, this is because I was having a conversation with someone the other day. And we were talking about the cost of anything to do postnatal. So anything to do post baby, whether that is in America, I would include medical care in this. Whereas personal training, programs, diapers, buggies, travel systems, all that sort of stuff, formula, all that sort of stuff. And we were talking about inclusivity. And, not to brag, but, I have a black friend. And I know I sound like an arsehole when I say that. That's okay. But the reason Healthy Postnatal Body is free for 3 months, and this is how I set it up, right, is because if you want to be inclusive, you cannot be middle class inclusive. The people with the least amount of money to spend on postnatal care tend to be people from minority backgrounds or people that need a bit of equity in their life. So they tend to be people from minority backgrounds, disabled people or less able-bodied or whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to get the terminology right all the time, but I'm trying. And, if those people are in lower income jobs, or they make up a high percentage-wise, if they're in more lower income jobs, then it's all well and good saying you're inclusive. If you charge £28 a month, looking at you, Mutu, £28 a month for your program, but they will have to work significantly more hours to afford that postnatal care than someone who makes £20 an hour does. So by definition, you're not really that inclusive. And I've said this before because I'm really big on this. If you think what you do is so important, then why are you making it so expensive? If you think that if you want to be inclusive, you cannot say, but I'll charge middle class prices or in upper class prices. You can't charge $1,000 an hour for PT and then say, but I also take on board black clients because I'm trying to help the black community. Well, you know full well that all your target audience is going to be predominantly white. You're just virtue signaling at that stage. And this is why it bothers me so much when I hear a lot of people talk about inclusivity and how I had a chat with somebody a month or so ago, and they were wanting to come on to the podcast, but they only wanted to come on if there was also going to be a person of color on the podcast. And I said, that makes no sense. I always interview one person at a time. But they were being inclusive. I said, but I interview people of color regularly. I mean, a lot of people that I've interviewed, they're experts in their field. I don't tend to just invite somebody just because they are white or just because they are a person of color. I invite them because they're experts and they want to come on, and it doesn't matter who that is. And I always only invite one person on, right? And I think double interviews tend to be a bit confusing. And if they wanted to come on, but they only wanted to come on, this is a bigger person than my podcast would usually have on, they only wanted to come on if they could bring someone with them. I said, no. I'll happily interview the other person separately from you, but not as some sort of inclusivity quota that we have some sort of token gesture going there so that the podcast isn't all white and all heterosexual, right? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. And then I looked at the products that these people are in charge of, and you find that they are very much middle to upper class. That is their target market. And I'm not saying there aren't people of color in that section that they're catering for, and they're probably doing a grand job. But predominantly, all you're inclusive for is money at that stage. So you're including green. That's the level of your inclusivity. Is anyone with money is welcome. And that just doesn't really work for me. Right? It's a little bit too virtue signaling for me. And I know someone will send me an email saying, you're virtue signaling just for bringing it up, bringing it up even. But I think it's an important point to make. You cannot be inclusive if you exclude people on lower income. Right? You just can't be. That makes no sense to me. Anyways, that's my little rant done. That's my little podcast done. It's a nice short one this week, and apologies if you thought it was a shitty one. I've got a bit of a cold. And it's getting to me a little bit. It's not the COVID. I've tested and I'm fine, but still. Anyways, you have a tremendous week. I'll check in on you next week. And as always, peter@healthypostnatalbody.com if you have any questions or any comments at all. Right? You take care of yourself. Bye now.
Your love to get me through the day. There's nothing like your touch to get me carried away. Babe, I know the road's been long, but let us right here. Stronger than any fear. I'm in love with you and all that you are. I'm in love with you and all that you'll ever be. Babe, it's enough for me. There's something about your eyes